My name is Michael Hayes, and for most of my life, I believed I had a father who stood unshakably in my corner. He wasn't perfect, no man is, but he was steady, dependable, and the kind of parent who showed his love in actions more than words. When my mother passed away during my teenage years, it was my father who kept me from unraveling completely. He was the anchor in a storm that felt endless. But grief is a strange thing. It leaves gaps in our lives, spaces where loneliness echoes. My father remarried a few years after my mother's death, and that's when Elaine entered our world. At first, she seemed polished and kind, the type of woman who knew how to carry herself in a room. She was all smiles, soft touches on my father's arm, and a kind of rehearsed warmth whenever I was around. She brought with her a son, Travis, who was just a few years younger than me. Where I had been raised on discipline, effort, and humility, Travis lived as though the world owed him something. He was spoiled to the core, arrogant in a way that only comes from being told yes too many times in life. I noticed the imbalance immediately. My father tried his best to keep us both included, but Elaine's influence was strong. Travis got the lion's share of attention, of favors, of indulgence. My father, blinded by his desire to keep his new wife happy, often went along with her. It stung, but I told myself, as long as Dad loves me, I can live with being second place in Elaine's eyes. Still, the signs were always there. I'd come home from college during holidays to find my old bedroom remodeled to suit Travis's taste. My photographs with Dad slowly disappeared from the mantel, replaced with staged family portraits where Elaine and Travis sat front and center. Even at family dinners, Elaine had a way of cutting into my conversations with Dad, redirecting his attention, as if she couldn't stand not being in control of the spotlight. Through it all, my father never stopped caring for me. I could see it in his eyes whenever we were alone, his pride in my studies, his quiet admiration of how I worked 2 jobs to put myself through school, his concern when I looked tired or worn down. But Elaine was like a shadow that grew longer every year, stretching between us, subtly pulling him away from me. Then came the year everything shifted. My father fell ill. At first, it was just fatigue. He brushed it off as age catching up to him. But the doctors had a different story. His heart was failing. He needed rest, treatment, and careful management of his stress. That's when Elaine seized her moment. Suddenly, she was everywhere, handling his appointments, organizing his medications, sitting in on every conversation with the doctors. She painted herself as the caretaker, the devoted wife, the one who was sacrificing everything to manage his health. And to give her credit, she did put on a convincing performance. But behind the mask, I could see something else. Control. She was positioning herself as the gatekeeper to my father's world. I'd show up at the house, only to be told Dad was too tired for visitors. Calls went unanswered more often than not, and when I did get through, Elaine's voice was always in the background, guiding his responses, steering the conversation. And then, the paperwork began. I noticed it one evening when I stopped by unannounced. My father sat at the dining room table, a stack of documents in front of him, pen in hand. Elaine hovered at his shoulder, her voice syrupy sweet as she explained what he was signing. Just routine things, she told me, her smile tight and dismissive when she saw me watching. Insurance updates, medical authorizations, you know how complicated these things can get. But I knew my father. He hated paperwork, always had. He avoided fine print like the plague. And yet here he was, obediently signing whatever Elaine slid in front of him. His hands shook as he wrote his name, the weariness in his face more pronounced than I'd ever seen. "Dad," I said carefully, "do you want me to look over those papers for you?" Elaine's eyes flickered, just for a second, but I caught it. A flash of annoyance, of warning. "Oh, Michael," she cut in before my father could answer. "There's no need. These are just standard forms. You wouldn't understand the medical jargon anyway." I opened my mouth to argue, but my father looked up at me then, his expression tired, worn. "It's fine, son," he said softly. "Elaine's been handling everything. She knows what's best." The words landed like a stone in my chest. He trusted her enough to hand over his decisions, his documents, his signature. and as much as I wanted to scream that he was being manipulated, I saw the exhaustion in his face, the way his illness had drained him. This wasn't the time to fight him. So I bit my tongue. That night, as I drove home, unease gnawed at me. Routine paperwork didn't explain the thick folder I'd seen, or the careful way Elaine had shielded it from me. Something was happening, something I wasn't meant to see. Over the next few weeks, the changes became harder to ignore. My father's accounts were suddenly out of reach, managed entirely by Elaine. Investments were being restructured. She began making offhand comments, subtle but sharp, about securing Travis's future. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water, I overheard her speaking to her sister on the phone. Of course, Travis will be taken care of. Michael's young, he can build his own life. It's only fair my son gets his share. My grip on the glass tightened until my knuckles turned white. Fair. My father had worked his entire life to provide for me, to ensure I'd never have to struggle as he once did. And now this woman, who had swept into our lives barely a decade ago, was plotting to rewrite that legacy for her own blood. I wanted to confront her right then, to tear the phone from her hand and demand answers. But something in me held back. If Elaine was playing a game, then charging in blindly would only make me look paranoid, bitter, or worse, ungrateful. So I stayed silent. I smiled through dinners, made small talk, played the role of the dutiful son. But inside, I was watching, listening, waiting. The final straw came one Sunday afternoon when I came by to visit. My father was resting in his study, and Elaine was in the living room with Travis. She didn't notice me at first as I paused in the hallway, just out of sight. "Once the papers are finalized," she was saying, her voice low but brimming with satisfaction, "everything will be in your name, Travis. The house, the accounts, the investments. Michael won't get a penny. He doesn't even suspect what's happening." Travis smirked. "Good. He doesn't deserve it anyway." I stood there, frozen, the words slamming into me like a blow. Everything. In his name. For the first time, the fog of suspicion cleared, and I saw the truth for what it was. Elaine wasn't just nudging my father into signing a few documents. She was orchestrating a theft, a betrayal of the deepest kind. She was rewriting my father's legacy to erase me completely. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, anger and grief tangled inside me. But beneath the chaos of emotion, something else took root. A clarity, a calmness. If Elaine wanted a game, I would play. But I wouldn't play by her rules. The night after overhearing Elaine's plan, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying her words on a loop. Everything will be in your name, Travis. The house, the accounts, the investments. It wasn't just greed, it was an erasure. She wanted to cut me out of my father's life, his memory, his legacy, as if I had never been his son at all. But rage alone wouldn't help me. If I charged in, screaming accusations, Elaine would spin it. She had already painted herself as my father's caretaker, the selfless wife. I would be cast as the ungrateful son, desperate for money. She was cunning enough to twist everything in her favor. So I made a choice. I wouldn't fight with emotion. I would fight with proof. The next morning, I called Mr. Halvorson, the family lawyer who had handled my father's affairs for decades. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 60s with a reputation for sniffing out deception. When I explained what I suspected, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Michael," he said carefully, "your father and I drafted his will shortly after your mother passed. At that time, everything was to go to you. I haven't been contacted to make changes." "That's the problem," I replied. "Elaine's been shoving papers in front of him, claiming they're medical authorizations. I think she's slipping in other documents." "Then you need to bring me copies of whatever he's signing," Halvorson said firmly. "Until I see them, I can't act. But if what you're saying is true, she may already have pushed through something dangerous." The line went dead heavy with implication. From that point on, every visit to my father's house became a mission. I played polite, smiled at Elaine, chatted with Travis, but my eyes were always searching. I began photographing any paperwork I could glimpse on the table when no one was looking. Sometimes it was just insurance forms. Other times, I caught legal documents with titles like property transfer authorization and beneficiary adjustment request. Each photo I sent to Halvorsen deepened his concern. "These are not standard medical documents," he told me grimly. "She's consolidating assets. Moving ownership. Michael, if this continues unchecked, you could very well be left with nothing." Meanwhile, my father's health was declining. He was thinner, weaker, and more detached each time I saw him. His once bright eyes seemed dimmed, clouded by exhaustion and whatever medications Elaine was feeding him. "Dad," I said one afternoon, sitting beside him in the study, "do you even know what you're signing these days?" He looked at me with a faint smile, the kind that broke my heart. "Elaine says it's all necessary. She takes care of me, son. I don't want to burden you." "You're not a burden," I insisted, my voice breaking. "You're my father. I want to be here for you." But Elaine's shadow fell across the doorway. "Michael," she said sharply, "he needs rest. You can visit another time." I clenched my jaw, swallowing my words, and kissed my father on the forehead before leaving. Her eyes followed me, cold and calculating. It was becoming clear, Elaine knew I was suspicious. The tension boiled over one evening during dinner. She had prepared one of her elaborate meals, candlelight, expensive wine, the kind of performance she liked to put on when outsiders might think we were a happy family. I sat across from Travis, who smirked at me as though he'd already won. "So, Michael," Elaine began, pouring herself another glass of wine, "have you thought about your future? I mean, you're not married, no children, still living in that modest little apartment. Don't you ever feel behind?" I set my fork down slowly. "I'm not behind. I'm building. Everything I have, I've earned myself." Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's admirable, dear. Because, well, you can't expect to live off your father forever. Travis, on the other hand, has shown such ambition. We've been discussing ways to invest in his future." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing between us. His silence cut me deeper than Elaine's words. I leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with her. "Funny you mention living off Dad. Because from where I'm sitting, Travis has done nothing but coast on his generosity." The air grew thick. Travis's smirk faltered, and Elaine's expression hardened. "Michael," my father said softly, his voice strained. "Please. Not tonight." I swallowed my anger, sat back, and forced myself to stay quiet. But inside, the fire only burned hotter. 2 weeks later, I got the call I'd been dreading. My father had suffered a severe cardiac episode. He survived, but the doctors warned us, his time was limited. He might have months, maybe less. The hospital room became Elaine's stage. She was constantly at his side, weeping theatrically, holding his hand as though she alone carried his burden. She controlled who visited, when, and for how long. But she couldn't control everything. On the third night, while she stepped out to take a call, my father motioned weakly for me to lean in. His voice was faint, but the words were clear. "Michael, promise me, you'll watch over things. Don't let them take what I built for you." My throat tightened. I gripped his hand. "I promise, Dad. I won't let them." Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." It was the last truly lucid conversation we had. When my father finally passed, grief hit me like a tidal wave. But before I had even processed the loss, Elaine moved with frightening speed. She arranged the funeral, controlled the guest list, handled the finances. She didn't so much grieve as she performed grief, all crocodile tears and hushed tones. Then came the reading of the will. We gathered in Halvorsen's office, myself, Elaine, Travis, and 2 of her relatives for moral support. Halvorsen's face was unreadable as he opened the envelope containing the final version of my father's will. What followed was a nightmare. According to the documents, nearly every major asset, the house, the bulk of financial accounts, and even certain family heirlooms, was now allocated to Travis. I was left with a small trust, barely enough to cover a few years of modest living expenses. Elaine's hand rested smugly on Travis's arm as the words were read. His grin widened with every line. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wanted to shout, to demand how this could be possible. But then I caught Halvorson's eyes. There was something there, subtle, deliberate. A flicker of reassurance. When the reading ended, Elaine turned to me, her voice syrupy sweet. I hope you understand, Michael. Your father wanted to make sure Travis had stability. You're strong, independent. You'll be fine on your own. I stared at her, my grief sharpening into something cold, unyielding. You think this is over? I said quietly. Her smile faltered. Halvorson cleared his throat. There are some legal irregularities we'll need to review before anything is finalized. I'll be in touch. Elaine's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. As we left the office, Travis brushed past me, whispering in my ear, "Guess I win, big brother." I didn't reply, because in that moment, I realized something important. They thought the game was finished. But in reality, it had only just begun. The air in Halvorson's office had been heavy that day, but his look of reassurance kept echoing in my mind. He wasn't finished. And neither was I. For days after the will reading, my phone buzzed non-stop with messages from relatives who had attended the funeral. Whispers had already begun. Why did Travis get everything? Wasn't Michael the real son? Elaine had tried to keep the circle tight, but families talk, and people knew something wasn't right. Still, I kept my mouth shut. Because while Elaine celebrated her supposed victory, the real work was happening quietly behind the scenes. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Halvorson again. He had spread out documents across his desk, each one marked with sticky notes and highlighted passages. "Michael," he began, "your instincts were correct. Several of these signatures from your father don't match his known hand. Not only that, there are pages inserted that don't follow legal formatting. Whoever prepared these did a sloppy job." Elaine. "But that's not all," he continued, sliding over a manila folder. "We also subpoenaed records from the notary Elaine used. The dates don't align with your father's hospital records. He couldn't have been physically present for some of these signings." A chill ran through me. "So you're saying?" "I'm saying she forged his consent. With enough evidence, we can challenge the will in probate court. And based on what I have, there's a strong chance it will be thrown out entirely." I exhaled slowly, a sense of vindication rising in my chest. But Halvorson wasn't done. "There's something else. We found financial transfers from your father's account into one controlled by Elaine, large sums, just before his health took a sharp decline. If we push this, Michael, it won't just be inheritance fraud. It could be criminal." For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. "Then let's push." Word spread quickly once the court date was set. Elaine tried to mask her panic with false confidence, but her control over the family narrative began to crumble. Some of her own relatives started distancing themselves, unwilling to be dragged into scandal. Travis, on the other hand, carried himself with smug arrogance, walking around town as though he already owned everything. He drove my father's car, wore his old watch, and even began boasting about plans to sell the family home. Each time I saw him flaunt what wasn't his, my resolve hardened. One evening, while I was leaving the courthouse after a preliminary hearing, Travis cornered me in the parking lot. "You're wasting your time," he sneered. "Mom's got everything airtight. You'll just embarrass yourself." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Funny. That's what people usually say right before they lose everything." The smirk on his face wavered. The probate hearing was nothing short of war. Elaine sat at her table, dressed in somber black, dabbing fake tears with a tissue. Travis sat beside her, his suit a size too big, his arrogance radiating like cologne. Halvorson was calm, methodical, and devastating. First, he presented the handwriting analysis, showing undeniable differences between my father's authentic signatures and the ones on the new will. Then came the notary records, which proved my father couldn't have been present for half the signings Elaine claimed. Finally, the financial transfers were revealed. Large withdrawals from my father's accounts, all routed to Elaine's personal holdings, just weeks before his death. The judge's expression hardened with each piece of evidence. Elaine tried to interrupt, tried to spin it as confusion or stress, but her voice shook. Her carefully curated mask of dignity was cracking. And then, Halvorsen played the final card, a recording. It was my father's voice, faint but clear, from that night in the hospital. "Michael, promise me, don't let them take what I built for you." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elaine's face went pale. Travis's jaw dropped. I sat still, hands folded, my father's words echoing through the room like a ghost finally getting his say. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. The amended will was declared invalid. My father's original will, leaving everything to me, was reinstated. But it didn't stop there. Based on the fraudulent documents and suspicious transfers, the court opened a separate investigation into Elaine. Within weeks, her accounts were frozen. The lavish lifestyle she had clung to unraveled overnight. Travis, stripped of his imagined inheritance, slunk back into obscurity. The car, the watch, the house, everything was returned. And me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Elaine confronted me one last time outside the courthouse. Her face was pale, her once perfect composure shattered. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You've ruined me, Michael. Ruined me." I looked at her calmly. "No, Elaine. You ruined yourself. Dad trusted you, and you betrayed him. This was never about me. It was about him. And now, everyone knows the truth." She glared at me, trembling with rage, before storming off. It was the last time I ever saw her. Standing in my father's study weeks later, surrounded by the books and memories he'd left behind, I thought about everything we'd been through. Elaine had tried to erase me. Travis had tried to replace me. But in the end, truth doesn't die quietly. It waits. It endures. And when the moment comes, patience becomes the sharpest weapon of all. I ran my fingers across the spine of one of my father's old ledgers and whispered, "I kept my promise, Dad. They didn't take what you built." And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.